The first thing I heard wasn't the police siren. It was the crackling sound of my own warning sign hitting the ground. One officer had just yanked the metal post from the soil while another rested a hand on his holster, watching me as if I was seconds away from doing something dangerous. "Sir," the taller officer said firmly, "step away from the property." I stared at him in disbelief. "My property," I answered, my voice trembling more from anger than fear. "You're standing on my land." Behind the patrol cars stood nearly a dozen neighbors, phones raised high, recording every second. Some whispered to each other, others smirked openly. At the center of them all stood the president of our homeowners association, Melissa Crawford, dressed in a cream blazer that looked more appropriate for a board meeting than a neighborhood street. She folded her arms with a satisfied smile, as though she'd already won. "There he goes again," she called loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He's been trespassing on HOA property for weeks. We finally have witnesses." I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. The officer glanced between us. "Mom says this common area belongs to the association." "It doesn't," I said, pulling folded papers from the inside pocket of my jacket. "I've got the deed. I've got the survey. I even had the county markers verified." Melissa laughed. "Fake paperwork doesn't change ownership." A few neighbors chuckled with her. The humiliation burned hotter than the July sun. I had lived on this land for 11 years. I knew every oak tree, every fence line, every inch of the creek that bordered the back of my lot. My late father's hands had helped build the fence now standing behind me. Yet somehow, in front of an audience and 2 police officers, I was being treated like an intruder. The shorter officer accepted my documents but didn't even unfold them before his radio crackled. "Unit 12, dispatch said. "County Survey Division is requesting immediate contact regarding the reported trespassing complaint." The officer frowned. "County Survey Division." Melissa's confident smile flickered for the first time. A white county SUV rolled around the corner, followed by a black pickup carrying bright orange surveying equipment. The older man who climbed out wasn't looking at me. He was staring directly at Melissa. His expression told me someone had made a mistake, a very expensive mistake. "My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 43 years old, and I own a small land surveying company in Cedar Ridge, North Carolina. Most days, my work involves settling boundary disputes before they become lawsuits. Ironically, I spent years helping strangers protect their property lines, never imagining I'd one day have to fight for my own. The property at the center of all this wasn't just another house with a mortgage. It had been in my family since 1984, when my parents bought nearly 3 acres on the edge of what was then open farmland. Back then there wasn't an HOA, no gated entrance, no stone monument with the neighborhood's name carved into it. There were dirt roads, old maple trees, and enough space that neighbors waved instead of argued. After my father passed away, my mother stayed until her health declined. When she moved into assisted living, she transferred the property to me. I could have sold it for a healthy profit after developers surrounded the area with upscale homes, but selling never crossed my mind. Every board on the back porch carried memories. Every fence post reminded me of weekends spent beside my father with a hammer in one hand and lemonade in the other. I wasn't about to trade that for a larger paycheck. Life stayed peaceful for years. My nearest neighbors respected the property line, and I respected theirs. We'd chat while mowing our lawns or wave from our driveways. Nothing dramatic ever happened. That changed the spring Melissa Crawford became president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Technically, my property wasn't part of Willow Creek Estates. It had existed long before the subdivision was built, and every closing document made that crystal clear. Still, Melissa behaved as though every square foot within sight of the neighborhood entrance belonged under her authority. At first, the changes seemed harmless. Workers installed decorative flower beds near the subdivision entrance. Then came new landscaping along the road that bordered my western fence. One Saturday morning, I noticed something odd. A crew had removed one of the old county boundary stakes near the roadside ditch. I parked my truck and walked over. "Morning," I said. "Who told you to pull that marker?" One of the workers looked uncomfortable. "Our supervisor." "Who's your supervisor?" He pointed toward a black SUV parked farther down the road. Melissa stepped out wearing sunglasses and carrying a clipboard. "Oh, Ethan," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes, "we're just cleaning up the neighborhood." I looked down at the missing survey marker. "That's a county monument." It was an eyesore. "You can't remove county survey monuments." She shrugged. It wasn't hurting anything. I knelt beside the empty hole where the marker had been anchored for decades. My stomach tightened. That wasn't landscaping. It was the first time someone had tried to erase the line separating my land from everyone else's. And over the following weeks, I began noticing things that couldn't possibly be accidents. The freshly cut grass extended farther onto my property every weekend. Small utility flags appeared several feet inside my boundary. Then one morning, I found a wooden stake driven into my lawn with orange paint marking a line that had never existed before. Someone wasn't just crossing my property. They were quietly redrawing it. For a few days, I tried convincing myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe a landscaping contractor had misread a plat map. Maybe someone had confused the old county markers with temporary construction stakes. Mistakes happened. I'd seen plenty of them during my years as a surveyor. But mistakes don't multiply. Every time I corrected one problem, another appeared. The orange stakes became white PVC markers. The white markers became strings stretched across part of my front yard. Then, one Monday morning, I woke up to find a professionally printed sign planted less than 20 feet from my mailbox. Future HOA green space. Authorized personnel only. I stared at it in disbelief. They hadn't just crossed my property line. They'd claimed my land. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures from every angle. Then I pulled the sign out of the ground and loaded it into the bed of my truck. An hour later, there was a loud knock at my front door. Melissa stood outside with 2 HOA board members behind her, Trevor Lang, the association's vice president, and Denise Holloway, the secretary. All 3 wore matching polo shirts embroidered with the Willow Creek Estates logo. Melissa smiled as if we were old friends. "Ethan," she said pleasantly, "we noticed you removed HOA property." I folded my arms. "You mean the sign you planted on my land?" "It isn't your land." "It absolutely is." Trevor stepped forward with a folder tucked under his arm. "Our development plans show this parcel belongs to the association." I couldn't help laughing. Development plans don't override recorded deeds. Melissa's smile disappeared. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I replied calmly. "You're trying to steal property one sign at a time." Denise shook her head dramatically. "See, this is exactly what we've been documenting, hostile behavior." "Hostile," I echoed. "You walked onto my property without permission." Melissa pointed toward the road. "Actually, we're standing on HOA common space." I looked down at the concrete survey monument embedded in the grass just a few feet away. "No," I said. "You're standing 3 feet inside my recorded boundary." For a split second, none of them spoke. Then Melissa took out her phone. "If you won't cooperate," she said, "I'll let the authorities handle it." I watched her dial. "Hello," she said after a moment. "Yes, I'd like to report an aggressive trespasser refusing to leave HOA property." I blinked. She was reporting me, standing in my own front yard. I stepped back onto my porch and hit the record button on my phone. "You do realize this call is being recorded?" She looked directly into my camera. "Good," she replied. "The police can watch it later." 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled into my driveway. The officers separated us and began asking questions. Before I could finish explaining, Melissa handed one officer a thick binder. "Our legal documents are all right here," she said confidently. "He's ignored multiple notices and continues occupying association land." The officer flipped through the pages before looking at me. "Sir," he said, "do you have anything proving this property belongs to you?" I nodded. "I have everything." I walked inside, unlocked the fireproof cabinet my father had bought years ago, and pulled out the original deed, certified surveys, county plats, and decades of recorded documents. As I carried the stack back outside, I noticed Melissa whispering to Trevor. Neither of them looked nervous. They looked prepared. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a carefully planned operation. The officers did something I wasn't expecting. Instead of immediately choosing a side, they asked both of us to stop talking. The older officer, Sergeant Daniel Ruiz, took my folder in one hand and Melissa's binder in the other. He flipped through a few pages from each before looking up. "I'm not making a property determination in someone's front yard," he said. "This is a civil matter unless there's evidence of criminal activity." Melissa's confidence returned instantly. "So you'll remove him from the common area?" Sergeant Ruiz didn't even look at her. "I said I'm not making that determination." She forced a smile, but I could see the irritation creeping into her face. After the officers left, I stood on my porch replaying the entire encounter. Something kept bothering me. Melissa hadn't acted like someone who genuinely believed she was right. She'd acted like someone following a script. The next morning, I called the one person I trusted more than anyone when it came to property disputes, Grace Whitmore. Grace was 62. A real estate attorney who had spent nearly 35 years untangling land cases across North Carolina. She'd even represented my parents once in a boundary dispute long before I inherited the property. She listened without interrupting as I laid every document across the conference table in her office. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I don't think they're guessing." "What do you mean?" "I think they're relying on paperwork they expect no one will question." She slid Melissa's binder copy closer. "Let's find out where it came from." Over the next 3 days, Grace and I became detectives. We visited the County Register of Deeds. We requested archived subdivision filings. We pulled every recorded plat map dating back nearly 40 years. We even tracked down permits from when Willow Creek Estates was originally developed. Most of the documents matched perfectly. One didn't. Grace tapped her finger against a revised subdivision plat filed only 18 months earlier. "Look here." At first I didn't notice anything unusual. Then she handed me an older version. The difference was subtle. On the revised plat, the HOA common area extended nearly 30 feet farther west, directly across part of my property. "That's impossible," I whispered. "It is," Grace replied, "unless your deed was amended." "It wasn't." "It couldn't have been without your signature." We requested the filing history. The county clerk returned carrying another folder. "This amendment was submitted by the developer's engineering consultant," she explained. Grace frowned. "Where's the supporting survey?" The clerk searched again. "There isn't one." Silence filled the records room. Grace slowly closed the folder. "You don't redraw private property boundaries without a certified survey." My pulse quickened. "So how was this accepted?" "I don't know." She paused. "But now I want to." 2 days later, another breakthrough came from somewhere I hadn't expected. My next-door neighbor, Harold Jenkins, knocked on my door carrying an old security camera hard drive. "I almost deleted this," the retired electrician said. "Then I remembered your fence." He handed me the drive. "My cameras cover part of your roadside entrance." That evening, Grace and I watched the footage frame by frame. At 2:17 a.m., nearly 6 months earlier, a pickup truck stopped beside my property. 3 men climbed out. One carried digging tools. Another carried survey equipment. The third was Trevor Lang. We watched in stunned silence as they pulled the original county boundary monument out of the ground under cover of darkness. Then they replaced it several feet inside my property. Grace hit pause. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked at me. "Ethan," her voice was barely above a whisper. "This isn't a boundary dispute anymore. It never was." She nodded. "This is evidence tampering." And suddenly, everything Melissa had done since that day made perfect sense. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the security footage again. Trevor stepping out of the truck, the men digging around the county monument, and the deliberate way they repositioned it. It wasn't reckless or spontaneous. They moved with the confidence of people who believed no one would ever question them. By sunrise, Grace had already called. "Don't send that video to anyone," she said before I could even say hello. I wasn't planning to. "Good. We need to preserve the chain of custody. If this goes to court, the last thing we want is for them to argue the footage was altered." Within hours, she had arranged for a digital forensics specialist to authenticate the hard drive. The expert confirmed the timestamps were original, the footage hadn't been edited, and the recording had been stored continuously since the night it was captured. That alone was devastating. But Grace wasn't finished. "There has to be a reason they wanted your land," she said. We started digging into the HOA's long-term development plans, and this time we found what they'd been trying so hard to hide. Buried in the meeting minutes from nearly a year earlier was a proposal to build a second entrance into Willow Creek Estates. The entrance would improve traffic flow, increase property values, and make room for an additional phase of luxury homes. There was only one problem. The proposed entrance cut directly across the front corner of my property. Without those 30 feet of land, the project couldn't be built. I stared at the blueprint spread across Grace's desk. They weren't trying to correct a boundary. She nodded. They were trying to create one. Everything suddenly fit together. The missing survey monument, the revised plat, the fake HOA signs, the repeated attempts to make me look like I was trespassing. If enough people accepted the new boundary as fact, they could pressure me into giving up the land or convince a court that the line had always been there. It was never about landscaping. It was about millions of dollars in future development. When Melissa learned we'd hired legal counsel, she abandoned the polite act entirely. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived. The HOA was fining me $500 a day for unauthorized structures on HOA property. Those structures included my mailbox, my fence, and even my warning sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." Grace laughed when she read the notice. They're doubling down. They're trying to bankrupt me. They're trying to scare you. The pressure didn't stop there. Neighbors I had known for years suddenly avoided eye contact. Anonymous posts appeared on community social media accusing me of trying to steal land from the neighborhood. Someone spray-painted the word "thief" across my warning sign in red paint. Then one evening I found Melissa waiting beside my driveway. She stepped toward me before I could get out of my truck. "This is your last chance," she said quietly. "You withdraw the lawsuit." I didn't file it, my attorney did. You know what I mean. I locked eyes with her. "No, Melissa, this ends in court." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear behind her confidence. She realized we had found something she never expected anyone to uncover. As I drove away the next morning with Grace beside me, carrying boxes filled with authenticated evidence, certified records, and witness statements, the county courthouse came into view. The fight over my land was over. Now the fight for the truth was about to begin. The courtroom was already half full when Grace and I walked through the doors. People from Willow Creek Estates filled the gallery. Some were there out of curiosity. Others clearly expected to watch me lose. A local reporter sat near the back with a notepad, quietly speaking to a photographer. Even a few neighboring HOA board members from nearby communities had shown up after hearing about the case. Melissa Crawford sat at the defense table in a navy suit, whispering with the HOA's attorney, Richard Sloan. Trevor Lang avoided looking in my direction altogether. Grace leaned toward me. "Stay calm, let the evidence do the talking." I nodded, though my heart felt like it was pounding against my ribs. When Judge Eleanor Matthews entered, the room fell silent. "Be seated." After opening statements, Sloan stood first. "This case," he began confidently, "is about a homeowner who has refused to acknowledge the lawful authority of the Homeowners Association. The disputed parcel has been designated common property under a revised subdivision plat properly filed with the county." He held up copies of the amended plat. "The plaintiff has ignored repeated notices and intentionally disrupted community improvements." Grace didn't react. She simply made a few notes. When it was her turn, she walked slowly to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor," she said, "the defense wants this court to focus on a revised drawing." She paused. "We intend to focus on the law." The first witness was the county records clerk, who testified that the revised plat had indeed been filed. Grace approached. "Was a certified boundary survey submitted with that amendment?" "No." "Was the plaintiff's deed ever amended?" "No." "Did the county receive any signed conveyance transferring 30 feet of Mr. Brooks's land to the HOA?" "No." "So the recorded ownership never changed?" "Correct." A quiet murmur spread through the gallery. Next came the digital forensics expert. He explained in careful detail how Harold Jenkins's security footage had been preserved and authenticated. "There is no evidence of editing or manipulation," he testified. Grace nodded. "Your Honor, we'd like to publish Exhibit 27. The courtroom lights dimmed. The video appeared on the large courtroom monitor. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the pickup truck entered the frame. 3 men climbed out. One carried digging tools. The second unloaded surveying equipment. The third, Trevor Lang. The room was completely silent as the footage showed them removing the original county boundary monument and reinstalling it several feet inside my property. Someone in the gallery gasped. Melissa's attorney immediately stood. Objection. On what grounds? Judge Matthews asked. The video lacks context. Grace didn't miss a beat. The context is provided by the next witness. She called Harold Jenkins, who testified that his cameras had continuously recorded that section of roadway for years and that he had personally turned the hard drive over without altering it. Then Grace called the county survey supervisor. He studied the video for less than 30 seconds before speaking. The monument being removed is an official county survey marker. Grace asked quietly, "Can private citizens relocate one?" "No." "What happens if they do?" "It is a serious violation because every property boundary that depends on that monument becomes unreliable." The judge slowly removed her glasses. She looked directly at Trevor. "Mr. Lang." Her voice was calm but unmistakably firm. "Were you present when this county monument was moved?" Trevor swallowed hard. For several long seconds he said nothing. Then, barely above a whisper, he answered, Yes." The courtroom became so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. Trevor's single word, "yes," hung in the room like a weight no one could ignore. Melissa slowly turned toward him, her expression frozen in disbelief. Richard Sloane looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Judge Matthews leaned forward. "Mr. Lang," she said evenly, "did anyone instruct you to move that county survey monument?" Trevor rubbed his trembling hands together. I'd like to speak with my attorney." "You may answer the question." His eyes darted toward Melissa. She stared back at him, silently pleading. Finally, he lowered his head. "Mrs. Crawford told us the developer needed the marker moved before the new entrance plans were finalized." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Melissa shot to her feet. "That's a lie." Judge Matthews raised her hand. "Sit down, Mrs. Crawford." She hesitated. "Now." Melissa slowly lowered herself into her chair, but the confidence she'd carried for months had completely vanished. Grace stood. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to admit the HOA board meeting minutes, internal emails obtained during discovery, and the proposed subdivision expansion plans." "Admitted." Grace displayed one email after another on the courtroom monitor. In one message, Melissa wrote, "Once the revised plat is accepted, Brooks won't have much choice. He'll either cooperate or spend years fighting it." Another email from the developer's project manager read, "The secondary entrance cannot be constructed unless the western boundary issue is resolved." The final email came from Trevor himself. "Marker relocation completed, waiting for revised records." Richard Sloane quietly closed his legal pad. He knew the case was over. Judge Matthews spent nearly 20 minutes reviewing the exhibits before delivering her ruling. The evidence clearly establishes that Mr. Ethan Brooks remains the lawful owner of the disputed property. She looked directly at Melissa. The court further finds that the defendants knowingly relied upon altered boundary evidence, attempted to deprive the plaintiff of real property without legal authority, filed false enforcement actions, and initiated law enforcement intervention based upon materially false representations. She turned another page. All HOA fines issued against Mr. Brooks are declared null and void. Relief washed over me, but the judge wasn't finished. The matter concerning the unlawful removal and relocation of an official county survey monument is referred to the appropriate prosecuting authorities for criminal investigation. Melissa closed her eyes. Judge Matthews continued. The HOA is permanently enjoined from entering Mr. Brooks' property without his consent. Furthermore, the association shall reimburse the plaintiff for attorney's fees, litigation expenses, and compensatory damages. The amount appeared on the screen. $842,000. The courtroom erupted. The bailiff immediately called for order. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Grace and me. One asked, "Mr. Brooks, how does it feel knowing you proved your ownership?" I looked back toward the courthouse doors. "It was never just about 30 feet of land," I said. "It was about proving that no one, not an HOA, not a developer, not anyone with money or influence, is above the law." Within weeks, Melissa resigned as HOA president. Trevor accepted a plea agreement after cooperating with investigators. The developer abandoned the second entrance project entirely and later settled additional civil claims brought by several homeowners whose properties had also been affected by inaccurate boundary representations. As for Willow Creek Estates, the community voted in an entirely new board, hired an independent auditing firm, and adopted strict transparency rules to ensure nothing like this could ever happen again. The land my father had helped protect decades earlier was finally, unquestionably, mine. And this time, everyone knew it. Several months have passed since the court ruled in my favor, and life has finally settled down. The fence still stands where my father and I built it years ago. My warning sign remains at the edge of the property, not because I expect another fight, but because it reminds me that standing up for what's right is sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do. Every time I walk the property line, I think about how close I came to losing something that had been in my family for decades, not because the law failed, but because a few people believed no one would challenge them. This experience taught me that documents matter, evidence matters, and integrity matters even more. When powerful people try to rewrite the truth, patience and facts are stronger than intimidation. If I had given in out of fear or frustration, the outcome would have been very different. If you've ever dealt with an overreaching HOA, a property dispute, or a neighbor who thought they could bully you into giving up your rights, I'd genuinely love to hear your story. Have you ever had to fight to protect your home or property? What happened? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else facing the same battle. If you enjoyed this story and want more dramatic HOA, legal justice, and property rights stories based on realistic situations, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next upload. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, sometimes the smallest piece of land can reveal the biggest truth about courage, justice, and standing your ground. Until next time, take care and stay strong.